Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Light Haven podcast. My name is Ruth, mystery student towards the awakening of consciousness. And today we have a special guest here today, Adonis, who is another fellow mystery student. Our topic today is a fascinating one on the power of the interplay between the mind, our consciousness, our intentions, and our reality. And it is one of my favorite topics. So to kick us off, let's talk intentions.
All right. Intentions are a very interesting topic, I would say. I think probably many of your listeners are familiar with things such as the law of attraction, manifestation. These are very popular topics. I think we can find videos of this easy on YouTube. But I feel like this topic could go so much more in depth. In the sense, when we look at things from a perspective of just looking to gain materially, looking to, fulfill dreams or small values like this, it's really selling short the point, right? When we look into intentions and reality setting, what we are really looking at is the ability to control our own reality around us and to move in a direction where we can really shift just everything about time, space, all of these things. And these are just interesting things that if you look at many types of esoteric teachings or even certain religions, Eastern traditions a lot really get into this idea. First off the top of my head really comes into Buddhism. I know you have experience with Zen, and the Buddha brought up a lot of the idea of causality and how beyond mind, beyond emotions, that everything is really driven by this notion. So
Yeah, I think the whole topic of intentions and how we think and feel goes deep. You mentioned a few things that I'm quite interested in getting into. So one of the first ones you mentioned was control. And control stood out for me because I think it's a tricky one, right? We're talking about how we play with reality, how we work with our emotions, our energies. And I definitely feel that we do have a part to play. Maybe for me personally, I wouldn't use the word control, and that could just be me, how I understand that there's an element of surrender and letting go of certain tensions and attachments. And this comes from Buddhist philosophy. And it's when we surrender to the dance, this kind of flow in the universe, that we may find that we naturally come into a lot of things that we always wanted, but we were going the wrong way about trying to get them. And it's almost like the universe has this kind of joke on us, where the very thing that we grasp and cling to and pull on, I want this so badly, is the very thing that we cannot have because we are chasing it. And again, if we're talking about energy, when we're chasing something, we're coming from a subconscious position of lack. And that very position of lack is what drives away the opportunity to partake of those enjoyments that we hope for, that kind of fulfillment. So to tie this back to Zen Buddhism, the Buddhist philosophy is really about letting go of everything. And they do use specific terms. There's things like impermanence, non-attachment, and the great reality. But essentially, we could summarize all this as a gradual kind of letting go. Now, the difference between what we're talking about, say, using intentions or working with energy and finding ourselves in a particular favorable position or a position that maybe we could say, this is where I'm meant to be, somewhere extra fulfilling. The difference between that and what's taught in Buddhism is that the goal of Buddhism is not to necessarily achieve something or to attain a specific outcome. So, what is the goal? The goal is freedom. And yes, if you are not a monk, if you're not if you're what is called in Buddhism a lay person, then potentially you will have a lot of fulfillment and enjoyment from a form of detachment. But essentially, the way it works is when you're using certain practices in Buddhism, you're practicing gradually through meditation and through reading the Buddhist philosophy, letting go of everything until you're completely free. Now, if you're a monk, then obviously specific steps are taken to exit society and to leave behind all of the trappings of the world, the pleasures, and find a kind of inner peace. But if you are someone living in the world and not running away from all the different types of experiences that we have, I think you can still find huge fulfillment in this kind of letting go. And surprisingly, when we let go of all of these like clingings and cravings, things that we want, then it ends up that we may find ourselves in all kinds of experiences that turn out to be very enjoyable. So that's what I have to say about intentions, but also the Buddhist philosophy aspect.
Well, yes. When you brought up the issues of control, I think the point I was trying to get at was more in the sense of when we use our intentions to move in the direction for these sort of manners, we're missing sort of the point of what we are capable of in the first place. So if to use our intentions for simple desires and things like that really is not grasping the true point of causality. So what I was meaning to say towards that idea in the Buddhist philosophy, I know the Buddha talks about causality and how that really is the meat of what everything that is going on right now. If we were to compare that to a New Age philosophies, certain things like the law of one, it really points to the fact that this reality is really, in a sense, it's duality, right? And in that duality, our perception may see that as good, evil, or light, darkness. There's many things, masculine, feminine. All of these examples are duality, and we perceive this duality through that sense, right? So for us to truly comprehend, as you mentioned, we need to detach from that reality. And to detach is to detach really from the concept of duality itself. So when we can detach from the concept of that duality itself, then we come into something I would like to call with the term of conscious willpower. And that conscious will is truly what drives our ability to create. So when I say, I guess I use the word control or create, it is in that sense that if we are able to detach from our concepts of duality and all of these things, then we are able to mold the construct itself in a way that has either positive, negative ways. I mean, that one would feel necessary. I would hope that people would want to do positive things, but really, it is all just energy, and it is in itself removed from these human ways of looking at it as either wrong, right or wrong, and all these things.
Well, essentially, we're energy as well, right? So we have labels and categories and societal organization and our structures, our goals as civilization on this planet at this point in time. But when we understand energy, we understand that matter and energy are linked, and basically everything is energy, right? We're energy in motion, and having this experience as individual human beings, but essentially everything down to the table, the chair, you and me, one part of us is simply energy. So, whilst we have the experience of being conscious, we have the experience of being a person, maybe being identified. I would say the majority of people are identified with this human experience and how they feel as a person, their wants, their desires, their objectives, whatever it is that they're chasing. There is the lens from which we can view that even we are essentially energy. So we are energy, and we also have the phenomena called consciousness. So when we understand it like that, then we can also understand that in some sense, there is no difference between you and me and the car and the tree and the sofa. Maybe the experience is different being in a human body, but essentially we're all energy and everything is energy. So could that be why and how we are able to interact with our environment in a way where when we shift ourselves energetically in particular ways, then we find that the environment around us is also able to respond and shift in certain ways, as like a call out to the energy that we are putting out and that we are holding.
Yeah, well, in a sense, as you said, the universe itself is consciousness experiencing itself, right? And everything around us, whether it has a spark of the sentience or if it's simply a matter like that table right that's right in front of us, is all consciousness. And everything has its own vibration, its own energy signature, and all of these things. And with that conscious willpower that we brought up, one can do amazing things if they just realize that they are not attached to the construct itself. So, in the sense of if I was a being or a person that had access to this free, like pure conscious willpower, I could say move things with my mind or, move through time and space. All of these concepts are very much attainable in a sense, even though they sound like fantasy. The truth is that our consciousness exists outside of these constraints. All of these constraints are just, in a sense, an illusion of the construct that itself. And it's not that we don't live within these parameters and that we don't have to, go about our lives, but as we take in more practices and we do more things that connect us more to the objective truth that is behind reality, we can start to experience that true reality, which is outside of the construct. And then we can start to manipulate the energies around us in a sense of understanding how things work. So, for example, with everything being our conscious will and our mind, if something negative happens to us and we react to this negatively and we put out this negative energy from ourselves, well, then we keep ourselves in a negative place, as well as if we do not react to these negative things and just allow the universe itself to move between the polarities that's supposed to, then after the negative things pass by, positive things will occur. And it's also important not to overreact to those positive things either. If you go too much in one direction or the other, you'll be pulled in a certain way. It's to find that balance, that inner peace that is talked about in most esoteric schools
And many religions too.
and many religions as well. And that inner balance allows us to navigate the construct and move at our own pace and our own will. But it requires a deep understanding of the fact that we, well, are really in control of what happens to us. There's the word again. We really are, the masters of our own reality.
Mm-hmm.
And if we understand that, then we can move in a direction that, well,
benefits everyone, or
hopefully that benefits everyone. There are things that if we do things that are selfish, that would lead to negative things being manifested to us through karma and things like that. But also, if we really think about it, if we are to do something that is selfish in the first place, then we're attached to this idea of separateness and the construct itself. So, yes, if we use this notion that we set our attentions to get money or a car, yes, we can make maybe small things like this appear in our lives, but truly we won't actually ever be able to access the true extent of our ability to affect our reality, because we're still subjectively trapped in a smaller pigeonholed idea of what the reality really is. And what we are capable is so much more profound if we understand that we are part of this collective unity. That, there's stories of masters doing things that are straight out of a fantasy book, for example. So, it depends. Like I said, is it that important to get some money? Maybe. I don't know. Also, if you create a positive energetical field around yourself, more than likely you will attract to yourself more wealth and abundance spiritually than you could probably fathom with your own intellect for what you want to put in your pocket.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, these are all very interesting ideas. A few different things have come up for me. I guess the first one is, you mentioned detachment and reaction. And again, coming back to Buddhist philosophy, of course, they teach detachment. And it's almost that you can't be pulled either towards something or away from something. You have to come to a neutral place and create from that place. Now, the Buddhists don't say to create, they say just stay in the neutral place. But obviously, for the purpose of what we're discussing, then you might create from that place. And this also connects me to Joe Dispenza's teachings, because he refers to, in many of his meditations, going to a 0 point. And it's the same thing with different language, being neutral, going to 0 point, coming away from craving and aversion. That's a Buddhist terminology. So we're at 0 point. We're at this place of neutrality. Now, is that what you're talking about?
In a sense, it's interesting actually that you brought up the point of the Buddhist thing not to create at all. In essence, we all are creators, and we are all already creating the reality around us. We are just creating from a asleep, unconscious point of view. And in essence, I would say as we start to remember ourselves and we start to awaken our conscious abilities that lie dormant inside of us, there is a certain responsibility to actually create, and not create for selfish reasons or for separation. But if we were to do a small synthesis and just the entire population of the world were to awaken just a small fraction of their ability to create and understand that, there wouldn't be war in the world, and there wouldn't be poverty, and there wouldn't be starving people. But that would take 8 billion people tapping into these abilities. And there's a great Spider-Man quote, I'll say, but with great power comes great responsibility. And that's, I think, very pertinent to this idea, in the sense of just, we must strive to be better because we are all connected through this collective conscious willpower, and awakening the willpower within oneself actually does, through like osmosis, help the collective itself awaken its own creative willpower, even if it's just a little small fraction for each one of us.
Is that like the hive mind or the collective? I know it's called the collective unconscious, or is it something else? Is it like the universal mind? What are you talking about?
So yes, it's, I wouldn't say quite a hive mind. All of us individually do have our own connection to the universe or this collective mind, that all of us within us have our own individual connection to that, which is also aware of all of the knowledge in the universe. So in a sense, it's both a collective but also a multiplicity of individuals. We are all one, but we are also all unique if we are able to come to that realization. The thing is with the unconscious mind creating in that sense, that would be more of a, well, I guess hive mentality in the sense, but not a hive of the collective consciousness, but of the animal ego, that internal perception that all people have when we're unconscious, that not that it's actually attached to each other in each individual, but it's just the same desires, and it's mechanical. It's like the machines in the Matrix, right? We create these mechanical psychological aggregates, programs maybe is a better way for the listeners to understand it, but we have like this programming in our brain that we create through our own conditioning, and then this programming comes back to actually drain us of our own energy. In a sense, they are the machines that we created that are using us as batteries.
So, how did we become programmed? We did it to ourselves.
Well, in a sense, yes. We do it to ourselves. We come into this life through at a young age, and at that young age, we are taking in impressions from our parents, from things around us, and we develop our personality. And by a certain age, we're trying to live up to society's expectations. We take in the egos of our parents, all of these certain things. And then we're not really taught about the fact that, we have this consciousness or these like universal ethics that, sure, I mean, even modern religions do point to these things, but it gets twisted by society's morals, and morals change from generation to generation. The morals in the time of the Romans are not the morals that we have right now in America, let's say, or the morals even in America aren't the same as the morals that there are in China or Russia, right? So morals are, what's the word I'm looking for? Morals
Are
are,
they more like related to time and place, and change in the time as the time periods move along? Morals change, but then ethics is something universal. Is
yeah,
that what you meant?
yes, that's what I meant. There was a word I was looking for, but it's okay if it slipped my mind. Yeah, so like they're fluid, so like for us, certain places it might be okay to, do harm to someone as long as it follows the law of the land. And, all the religions may have something like similar to the Ten Commandments that are in Christianity. Well, thou shalt not kill, yet we'll have the death penalty for somebody who does a crime the wrong way. So there's a difference between these universal ethics and the actual like morality of society, which can change from a generation to generation, nonetheless from country to country or time period to time period of civilizations. So it is important for us to understand those things and realize that really that we did create these things through this conditioning, and the only way to remove this inner enemy, this inner perception, is through our own conscious work on ourselves. There's nobody that's going to do it for you. There's nothing external that will remove your own conditioning from yourself.
Your own limitations.
Yeah, you created it, but you have to also destroy it. And nobody else could do it for you. That's not going to be a therapist. It's not going to be some external man in the sky that's going to bring. Yes.
Right. And can you tell our listeners more about these aggregates? Because I feel like this is related to the limitations that we're talking about. So we mentioned conscious willpower is something. Maybe those who are new to this don't quite know what it is yet. They kind of feel, okay, that's something good. I want conscious willpower. And there's something in the way that we're now calling aggregates or psychological aggregates, our programming, our self limiting beliefs, our limitations that come from society, from family, and from ourselves. Somewhere at some point, we did that to ourselves, and now we're stuck in our own trap. So it sounds like these aggregates are really important. Can you tell us more about them and what do people do now?
Well, yes. So in a lot of esoteric schools, the psychological aggregates would be related to what we call the ego. Um, there's a common misconception that our inner perception, the ego, is just one individual thing, and that is who we are. Our ego, this inner perception, is actually very many. There's a Bible quote, I believe, I forget, when Jesus is encountering the man with what part of the Bible is that from?
Is it a possessed man, like
Yeah,
the pig story?
the possessed man.
Ah,
Yes.
yeah, I know that story. So Jesus was going, I think, on his travels, and he encounters a man who's possessed by demons, and the man reaches out to the Christ, please save me. He's possessed and he can't control the demons. And then in this myth, Jesus says, okay, I'm going to save you. And he commands the legion of spirits that's inside the possessed man to enter into the pigs. And then, oh, there's one part I forgot.
It's the quote.
Well,
the quote that the demons say is what I'm looking for on this story, even if I'm not as familiar with it. But they say we are legion, for we are many, and this is symbolic of the legion of these aggregates that we have inside of us, and that are constantly like the machines just fighting to feed off our energy. And there's not necessarily a unity in that, like in the sense, you know, we could be angry about one thing and then we get distracted by a billboard that's something we want to buy, and all of a sudden we forgot that we were angry at mom because I really want to buy that TV, constantly these things come in, these unconscious thoughts, and they pull us in different directions. We aren't in control of our own body at these times, or our own mind, and the consciousness is asleep at the wheel because our consciousness is asleep. So therefore, we're just getting pulled back and forth to our whims, to our desires, whether they're instinctual, emotional, whatever, overthinking, all of these things. They're constantly draining our vital energy force, and also using us to do things that are attached to the construct. So you brought up ideas of like impermanence. Well, the ego doesn't understand impermanence. The ego, is worried about dying. The ego is worried about, oh, can I get enough money to pay the next bill? All of these things are practical and in this life, and there is a purpose to be here. I mean, the consciousness comes here to learn about itself and learn lessons from this school of life, as I think the New Age likes to call it, school of life. I like that term, but there's a purpose. But we're supposed to learn lessons from our experiences, not get lost in them and fascinated and just daydream and move through life just following these things, never learning these lessons. And then we die. And then, as many religions and especially in Eastern practices have, there's reincarnation. But this idea that we're meant to just reincarnate is not quite accurate either. We only reincarnate over and over again because we're not getting the lesson. That we're here to transcend this reality, learn our lessons, and evolve to the next stage of existence, which would be, I guess, some people might think of it as being an angelic being, or others might think of it as these spiritual masters, or even extraterrestrial beings of the fifth dimension, whatever. We could call them many different things, but there are beings that have learned their way through this system, and now they have a, I don't want to use too deep of a word, but now they have a connection to higher realms of existence. And at those higher realms of existence, they are now architects of the construct. They are beyond this construct. While all of us are creating unconsciously, there are beings that drive pretty much this construct, and they look out for us. And again, like depending on what religion you are, if you're into pseudoscience, if you're into ETs, whatever, you may see these being subjectively as different things, but they're the ones that really do the most of the creation because they're the ones that are aware of what's going on. And again, beyond evil, beyond good, positive, negative, they're using their conscious willpower to create this school of life for us to go through so that we can also join them in that, I guess, in the higher realm of existence.
All very fascinating. So let's say that I'm someone who's real curious about the idea of conscious willpower, and I've understood maybe if I start observing myself, I might notice these aggregates, this internal multiplicity, and we've touched on internal states in past episodes, so our listeners may be familiar with this. Right, so what do they do now? Like they want to move into a way of contacting this higher realm, higher way of being, viewing the world through the lens of conscious willpower. And they know that their conditioning is something that obstructs them. What's next?
Well, that's the trick, right? It's the beginning of the taking the first steps towards this like path of initiation. Is that okay for me to use on this?
I think
now?
so,
All
yeah.
right.
I think, but maybe let's give some context. So when we say path of initiation, that's kind of a reference to, we could say, in many different schools of thought, some that are more well known than others, there's this idea that a spiritual path is something very special, something of a big undertaking that's not for the faint-hearted, not for everyone, but it's for those brave souls who intuitively sense that there is something much more. And we could say if we're understanding life as a school, you would have the kindergarteners and maybe you have the high schoolers that are getting ready to go to university. So it's not something for people at the kindergarten level. They can just enjoy the construct at their level of development. But there will be certain people in life that when they were born, maybe they had a sense, or they had, we could say, some kind of an awakened way of being that allowed them to question things. So they didn't just say, yep, I'm going to grow up, I'm going to get married and have a job and a family and buy a house, and that's it. There was a sense of inner restlessness, and they felt there was something more to reality. They weren't sure what it was, but they knew that something was pulling them, calling them to almost have a kind of a spiritual yearning. And maybe they went to many different spiritual schools, maybe they went to a few, but at some stage they found themselves taking very specific steps related to gaining a deep understanding of the universe. And in some groups, maybe they call that a path of initiation. And over history, this kind of an undertaking has been called everything under the sun. But yeah, we can use that.
Yeah, I just wanted to go with path of initiation in the sense of believe most esoteric schools, so whether that's like the Theosophists or even some that may be a little bit more dubious, like that are attached to other secret societies and stuff, that's the fair terminology for something like that. But yes, so this path of initiation, I would say if somebody was interested in looking into this and into the ideals of awakening consciousness, the first thing I would tell them is, best advice is balance, right? It's very easy to go into these things with these ideas of mystical pride, or just also with a lot of fear, because we just want things to change and we're scared of how life is turning out. And all of these motivating factors are motivating from our own internal perception. We have to understand that, especially in the beginning, that the first little small part, which is just taking that step to actually enter onto this path, is probably the hardest part of the path itself. When we look historically at all these masters, be that Jesus or the Buddha or Krishna, and these beings who came through on a lifetime where they were already developed on the path, because the path actually, sorry to say to many, it takes more than one lifetime. They arrived already having done some work in a past life, and then, finished the work entirely in one lifetime, just being just a small percentage ahead on that path. But they had done the work to detach from the construct, maybe in a prior life. And then all they had to do is show up one more time in another time and then do the rest of the work. Even though there was a lot of work to be done, once you're walking on the path of initiation, then you have the abilities to walk the path and finish the path. And you have a connection to the conscious willpower and other spiritual faculties. So what I would tell anyone who is just taking that first step is just not to beat themselves up, and balance, and just understand that it's okay to go through the ups and downs, the trials and tribulations. At our current state, we don't have much willpower at all. The willpower is tied up with our unconsciousness. So it's just more to focus on observing yourself and understanding your own psychology, and really trying to detach, understanding that certainly there are tools and things that will help us unconsciously set our intentions, and those are okay, but not to get wrapped up and fascinated in those things, because if we understand that eventually, through our own sheer will, we could do anything that, say, a deck of tarot cards helps us with, or going through an astrological chart helps us with, then at least we know where we're going. Not that there's anything wrong with using tarot cards or using astrological things or many other things that people use for tools, because when we start out, we need that help.
And lots of people love their crystals.
Lots of crystals,
crystal shops,
prayers, all of these things, and all these things work, and they're great. I mean, the construct was designed by these architects to have these little things, these clues, these tools to help us begin. We need those training wheels, right? Mm-hmm. That you eventually have to come off the bike. But it's good to not get too wrapped up into these things as the end all be all, or like, oh, well, if I eat this diet and I carry these crystals and I always do my tarot, then I'm just going to eventually awaken. It's like, we need to understand that these things will help me help myself understand myself. They aren't me either, right? Because at the end of the day, we have to understand that we are not our perception and detach from that. So as soon as we start getting, say, attached with like, oh, I'm a Gemini, that's me, instead of understanding that, oh, I was born under Gemini, this shows my programming that I need to work on to eliminate from myself. And my karma very much put me there because I do need to work on these things. So it is important, but to not become that, not to say, oh, well, I'm like this because of this. Well, no, that's missing the whole purpose of everything in this game. It's our traumas, right? It's everything that we've gone through in this life. We're supposed to learn a lesson, not for it, not use it as an excuse or a crutch to stay asleep in the egos that come from these things, right? So we need to eliminate that inner perception. Big thing is also eliminate fear. Fear is a huge, huge crutch. I think when it comes to understanding the difference between our ego and fear, it's that there really is none. If we look at ego as being, we talk about duality, right? So if we look at ego through duality, if ego's positive aspect, and I see positive not as a good thing, but just like its positive polarity is our attachment to things. Then what is fear? It's our fear of losing that which we are attached to. It's literally to fully understand and eliminate these traits from ourselves. We have to understand both the things we are afraid of and the things that we are attached to. Otherwise, we don't fully understand, and we never fully truly get rid of these defects in our mind because we're just moving it around, right? I could be like, oh, well, I don't want to be too prideful. Well, now I'm insecure. Or, oh, I'm so insecure, I need to feel better about myself. Well, now I'm just prideful. And it's
Right.
really all still just pride.
Battle
And
of
you haven't
opposites.
actually gotten rid of your pride.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense, yeah.
Yeah, well, the mind plays lots of games with itself. And I think it would be common for someone coming into doing the work on themselves to fall into this trap, to believe that they are doing the work, going through the motions of, say, starting to observe themselves, how they feel, how they think, how they react, where they are reactionary and behaving mechanically. But then once they see that, what we often see, maybe with students that are doing this work, is that then they can use a method to explain away how they've fixed the problem, but they haven't actually fixed it. So, how do people fall into that trap, and how do we avoid that?
Well, our own inner perception is clever, right? I believe it's Eckhart Tolle says that the ego is not necessarily intelligent, but it certainly is clever, right? It will play mind tricks with you and mind games we play with ourselves, you know? The mind itself, the intellect, is below this causality. It is mechanical. It's part of this body. It's kind of think of it as almost like an AI, but an AI that we created with our natural body, right? So it can play these tricks. It's going to rationalize, right? It understands, right? It's these psychological defects are their own living entities in another dimension that we don't have to get too deep into that, but like they are trying to survive, like they're trying to feed off our energy. I wouldn't even say they're evil. I mean, people certainly, yes, symbolically it's the devil, it's evil, but it's not necessarily. They're just living organisms trying to survive, living things we created with our mind in another realm, and they're just doing what they have to do to survive. And you have to understand that they are aware that we are trying to eliminate them to liberate ourselves from them. So of course they're going to tell you this. They're going to rationalize. That's a huge thing. There's always a rationalization. There's always defense mechanisms. All of these things are still just the ego itself, to blame others, to blame something that's external, when really all of the sources of all of our problems are really our internal perception. Yes, even if someone is doing something externally to you, right? It's your reaction to that really is the driving force of what it is, right? I'm angry because I'm allowing that to make me angry. I could also view someone saying something rude to me as just understanding that that person is trapped in their own anger and not taking it personally, right? So that's a perceptive. I only get angry because now I feel offended that he has harmed my pride, or he's taken money out of my pocket. That's my greed. Whatever it is, right? It still harkens back to your own ego being triggered by somebody else who is also an ego, but you're still allowing it to trigger your own ego, and allowing your ego will then causes you to suffer, and it feeds off of your energy regardless of what the external situation is.
So, what I've heard so far is people who say, yes, give me this conscious willpower. I'm signing up now. The first thing they do is work on balance. So, they want to come away from that clinging, craving and aversion, attachment, and then from a place of balance, they want to start observing themselves, seeing their own hidden aspects where they fool themselves, where they exercise self-deception, where they're trapped in certain ways of viewing things that cause harm. So, for example, you mentioned greed, pride, and there's many more. It's kind of like what's called the deadly sins, right? You've got envy, you've got gluttony. I think it doesn't have to be listed in in any religion, though it is in every religion. We have this intuitive sense of, here's a list of things that cause suffering. Don't do these things or you will feel bad and other people will feel bad. And then we go and we do all those things because we don't have control over our person. We're kind of like a victim of our desires and just like a leaf in the wind, being blown around by all kinds of different vested interests that are bubbling up from moment to moment. So this is good for understanding, okay, what is the path that someone wants to walk in moving towards obtaining conscious willpower. So they balance themselves, they start to observe and understand their inner workings. What's next?
Well, once we have the balanced energy. Once we are able to observe our inner state, I'd say objectively, but realistically, we probably still have subjectivity, but at least objectively enough that we are taking responsibility for our own inner state. The next thing would be to go into meditation, and in meditation, actually work to pull away from and dissolve these aggregates that are in our mind. Like,
I think we did talk about some ways to dissolve these aggregates in previous episodes. So there is some
okay.
there. Yeah.
Okay, yes. So when we dissolve those aggregates in our mind, then we will start to liberate more of our essence, our light, and we have more access to more consciousness. And then the process just kind of continues and goes over. But obviously, as I stated before, there'll be a certain point. It's that first little bit is the hardest, because once we liberate even just a small fraction of that light, then we start to become, aware that we are the observer all the time, or we start to become perceptive of the other energies of reality. That this is both visually, auditory, all of these things. Your perception of reality around you increases, and at a certain point, the more that happens, the more we awaken, then we start to unlock certain abilities. I don't know if it's appropriate to go super deep into that right now, but like, people will know things like being psychic, telepathy, all these sort of things, et cetera, et cetera. And then once those abilities are unlocked, that allows you to do even more work on your self-observation and dissolving these aggregates. And it's like a snowball effect, right? So you wake more, then you awaken even more abilities, then you have even more ability to just cleanse yourself more and more, and then just the exponential growth of consciousness is what comes from that.
So what if someone has started in this work and they've obtained a certain level of inner peace, and maybe they've experienced the dissolution of certain things inside of them that were causing themselves grief or pain for those around them. And they've been going through these processes for a while, but they don't have any abilities yet, or currently they don't know if they ever will have them. What would you say to that person?
Well, first of all, I do want to stress that we don't take on this work and we don't take on this practice to gain abilities. If that in itself is, I think I mentioned mystical pride before. If we are chasing, to have powers, we'll find that on this path, we will also hit a stop. I would not be honest if I would say that it's impossible to awaken certain of these powers without doing the work on your own perception. But there are consequences to that, and there's like karmic things. We could selfishly push through to awaken things, but our actual perception of reality doesn't change. So then we will still be bound in the same 3D problems and sufferings that we have, and not truly understand. That's where you have these things like people being obsessed with manifesting and law of attraction and all these other things. And it's, you get lost in that. And if anything, it can be even more detrimental to our development at that point, because it just is a effect that takes us even further and further away from what is the objective truth. But yeah, it's not about getting powers. All I meant to say was in the sense that, yes, once we get past that first initial step, that is the hardest part to breaking through. Once we break through and truly enter this path of initiation at certain levels that are, don't want to get as deep into it as that, but there are certain levels. It's more than just, doing the practices. There are certain things that happen in our internal states that must occur, but that will lead to things that assist us to move quicker along the path. But that's not the goal, and that's not the point. The point is to, just start to realize that we are eternal beings, to realize that death is not really death at all, and just remember who we are, and life becomes so much more simple and enjoyable. We talk about that inner joy, that inner peace, when we just actually finally realize the truth and realize that we don't have to take things so seriously.
Good stuff. There's a lot there that I think people can work with to start out. So we've given a lot of practical aspects. I'm keen to get a little bit into some theoretical stuff. Okay, so you've talked about conscious willpower. Sounds like a great spiritual or esoteric buzzword, really exciting. It might help people orient to maybe visualize some kind of a structure to help them see, where is this conscious willpower? Where does it sit?
So, okay, we could talk about the metaphysics behind it a little bit for those who might want their intellect stimulated a little bit. There's two really good ways I would say to look at the metaphysics behind this. There's both the esoteric religions have the Tree of Life and Kabbalah, which many people are probably familiar with to some extent, whether they're familiar with a more practical look at it or like the deeper internal understandings. It's valid either way. And then there's also just the metaphysical New Age spirituality way of looking at it, but they pretty much go hand in hand. It's the same thing with the proper discernment. But basically, as we look at the Tree of Life or we look at metaphysics, we live in the third dimension, obviously, of course. And the fourth dimension is time, the etheric vital sphere, right? So we have that. We know it exists even in a physical, practical way because time is there. Mm-hmm. But we actually can't move through it. If we were a being of the fourth dimension, we'd be able to move through time like we can move through space in this room right now. But there's that. And then beyond that is the fifth dimension, which is eternity itself. It's kind of like the cosmic shell of this construct. It's made up of two planes, Kabbalistically, which is the astral plane and the mental plane, one being of the mind, one being of our emotions. People are probably familiar with that from it's where we go when we dream. And if you can awaken in your dreams, you can actually explore that through a technique. First would be lucid dreaming, waking up out of a dream, and then a more objective experience where you just come out of your body without falling asleep at all. That would be astral projection. And then you can explore the cosmos, all of that. And that dimension is related to eternity. So all that has or will be, the universe expands and contracts, all that happens within eternity, that is that plane. Now, when we're talking about conscious willpower and causality, we're talking about the plane that is beyond that. We're talking about the sixth dimension. So we're talking about that which is outside of the construct, outside of the matrix, whatever you want to call it, but like is beyond that. Is if everything that is manifested is within this fifth dimensional matrix, then the sixth dimension is where things are unmanifested and created from. So we talked about how the beings that people may refer to as angels, or people may refer to as extraterrestrials, these beings are the architects of our construct, our matrix, right? So, and that plane of existence of conscious will that is outside of the duality of the construct, it's where duality is implemented to create the construct itself.
So that's where it sits in the structure. Can you share briefly, simply, for anyone who is not familiar with the tree of life, what are those spheres called up to conscious willpower?
Yes. So the sphere we're in now is the bottom sphere, the 10th sphere, which is Malkuth. This is the physical plane, the 3D, third dimension, three-dimensional reality. Right above that is Yasad, which is related to the vital body, the etheric plane, dimension of time, fourth dimension. Then when you move up and to the left, we have Had, which is related to the astral plane and the astral body. To the right of that is Netzach, which is related to the mental plane and the mental body. And then above that would be Tifereth, which is where the causal body sits in the sixth dimension. Also in the sixth dimension are higher levels of spirit, like our own individual divinity, divine presence. So that spirit, the Atman, is referred to. I mean, I think on the Tree of Life it's Chesed, but like the Atman in the Vedas, that sphere is there, and as well as our divine soul, which is Gebera, I believe is to the left of that. So that's what's going on in that unmanifested dimension, and then above that, you have like source itself and things related to Trinity, that, which are way beyond our intellect's concept. Yeah, no, I know. I'm just saying like that wouldn't be really able to describe intellectually. But yes, we're talking about that middle plane. So like with outside of what is manifested, and it's just where everything is light, and that is able to be changed and manifested and manipulated. The beings of that dimension would be formless beings of light, androgynous. They contain both. Energetically, they contain both genders, but themselves don't have form. They could take any form. They can change form. This is why I brought up the fact of like what one person sees as an angel, another sees as ET, is really truly the same being.
So is there a subjective filter that
there's definitely a subjective filter on that, in the sense of, because these concepts are beyond our understanding, when we have these experiences, spiritual experiences, let's say in a dream, that yes, we're experiencing the fifth dimension, but we don't comprehend it fully. It gets filtered still through our subjectivity. So these beings will appear to us. If I was a devout Catholic, this being might appear to me as Archangel Michael, but that same being might appear to someone else as Andromedan from another star system. And really, it's the same being. In fact, we talk about how this is outside of duality in itself. That same being that appeared to you also, say, as an angel, when it is bringing you a message of a positive polarity, might also shift into a form of a demon when you need a lesson that has a negative polarity, and that demon and angel are actually the same being. It's at that level really hard to definitively say this is this or this is that. It's more just intuitive sense, and like I said, it gets a little bit complicated from there, but I think that's enough. Yeah.
I think people who view everything very relatively and dualistically, especially because that is the kind of the flavor or the theme of this plane of reality, is I have good and bad, I have light and darkness, I have rich and poor. They will be very used to seeing things in this way. That can sound just fantastical, right? It sounds like something out of a fairy tale. If, let's say, we have skeptics and everything we've said for now nearly the past hour just sounds like a ridiculous fairy tale. You seem to have an intuitive sense that you've contacted these planes. What would you tell someone like that?
Well, I mean, when it comes to esoteric, I suppose, schools, regardless of which one they are, um, it's really important to understand that no one is trying to tell anyone directly, at least any proper school that's not trying to take advantage of you is not going to tell anybody that this is what it is and you should follow me and you should do these things. The truth of the matter is that all we can provide is a way to explore for yourself. It's really, the spiritual realm is a frontier that is accessible to anyone as long as they want it. And it's one of those things, you try these practices out for yourself, you see what happens, and then you'll have the direct experience for yourself. Real reality is fantastical. There's no other way to really truly put that and to truly understand that and to be able to disidentify with what's going on around you and to break this Maya. That's from the Vedas, I believe. It means illusion, but it's from the Vedas. It's also in Buddhism too.
It's in Buddhism.
Okay, so both of them, yes. So yeah, to break out of that Maya is the only way to do it is yourself. I could tell you, and you could believe me. You don't have to believe me. It's really irrelevant if you do too. What I tell you doesn't matter. It's, if you're curious about it and you want to experience it for yourself, you absolutely can, and you should. And if you don't, that's also okay. You don't have to. But yeah, this is not something. The thing is with reality is truly, if when we're stuck in our inner perception, when we're stuck in that reality of the world is 3D, there's nothing else out of this. I listen to modern science. We don't experience anything else. And in a sense, like, yes, this may be illusion is real, but to that person who's stuck in that, perception that it's real, well, it's real to them because we create, right? So if we create our own reality, then guess what? If we believe the illusion is real, then the illusion is real to us, So.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I guess what you're saying is find out for yourself. Don't take anyone's word for it.
Absolutely correct.
And there's a verse in the Bible that says, seek and you will find. So I think if someone is a true seeker and they're interested in maybe the occult, esotericism, finding the great reality, and they're researching all different kinds of spiritual schools and ways of thinking, they will be drawn to what is right for them to know more according to their current stage at this point in time. So everyone is right where they need to be. And there are certainly ways that they will be able to find out the truth of these matters. I also wanted to take a moment to come back to conscious willpower, because for anyone new to this, it's such a big topic and it can be difficult for people to grasp. When you are working from this plane of conscious willpower, what does your life look like?
Well, your life could look similar to what it is now, or eventually, hopefully, if you're practicing properly, will start to look better. But the truth is, it really doesn't matter what it looks like. It's how you perceive what it looks like, right? So, you could still be swimming in debt and, having whatever issues with your business. And if you're, attached to that, well, then your life looks like it's an awful hell, right? But at the same time, if you can understand that, this too shall pass, that I'm not this is not me, that I don't need to take things so seriously, you could still be living in your own personal heaven. I mean, obviously you still have to deal with the things practically. I'm not saying to just be like, oh, I don't have to do anything, but your internal state, you'd be looking at a life where you're still full of joy and you're happy to understand that you are alive and you're living in this life. You're grateful for the challenges life throws at you because you realize it's just a lesson and an opportunity to grow. So I forget who it was. There's actually somebody who said something similar to this. It was some
Maybe paraphrase it.
spiritual teacher. No, I'm going to say I just forget. I usually like to give credit to who said it, but I can't remember who it was. But I believe it's a New Age teacher. But it's the fact that, like, we can simultaneously be living in hell and living in heaven at the same time, just by our own level of consciousness, right? So the world could be in, I don't know, a dramatic war, and there'd be all this suffering, and there's people suffering, and yet those people still, with their perception, because really realistically, the negative perception, that negative state of thinking is what hell is symbolically. And if you're at a higher level of consciousness, there could be all these bad things going on around you, but your balance and your internal worlds are solid, then you're already living in heaven. And that doesn't mean you don't feel for other people, you don't notice the atrocities going on externally, but you also realize, again, the things will pass, that you have things to be grateful for, which is the fact that you exist at all and that you are a creator. And yeah, I mean, it's just it's a different way of looking at things. So it's, when we talk about what does your life look like, it's really, what does your life look like to you?
I see. So if I could summarize, it sounds like, and correct me if I've heard wrong, conscious willpower and understanding our experience from that plane means that we, number one, take responsibility, and number two, very importantly, we are internally free. So no matter what is happening around us, our circumstances can be like a wave in time, that we can experience both sides, both polarities. We can have what someone would call a positive experience or a negative experience, but because internally we are neutral and we are connected to something of a timelessness in our internal state and way of being, in that way we are free from all suffering and the illusions that we create, which cause suffering for us and others. Have I understood that correctly?
Yeah.
Great. Well, I think we've given our listeners a lot to digest and think about. And this is such a deep topic. Hopefully, we get to explore more and more like this in the future. But thank you so much for your time, Adonis, and sharing your wisdom with us. And to our listeners, please remember that the path to your best reality is in your hands to create when you become conscious.
Thank you for having me. And I just like everybody to know that we could all vibrate at a higher frequency and maximize our dharma for the collective.
Awesome. See you next time. Bye.